Now, here's your host, Dan Celia.
The committee decided today to keep the target range for the federal funds rate at 0 to 1/4% and to make no change in either its asset purchase program or its forward guidance regarding the federal funds rate target.
Well, what do you think we're going to be talking about a little bit today? Well, that was Ben Bernanke, of course, yesterday talking about the Fed rate. About quantitative easing. There is going to be no change. They don't feel the evidence warrants it. I agree with that, by the way. And if you remember on Monday, I said that if the Fed is going to use the same data that he used to start quantitative easing, there's no way he can stop. It would be a contradiction of all that he said 4 years ago, that the data warranted this quantitative easing. What the Fed said yesterday was that the economy, not the markets, the economy still stinks, make no mistake about it. That's what he said. He said, we are still in trouble, make no mistake about it. You can't see this if you're watching on TV, probably very well, but it is an article in the Wall Street Journal, and maybe you can see this chart right here, and you can see where it's going, and it starts out very high, this bar chart, and it goes down very low. What that is it's the estimate of growth that the Federal Reserve has been talking about since April 2011. Look at this. In April of 2011, the Federal Reserve Chairman had expected to see a potential 4.3% GDP growth. He was off a bit. In June of 2011, 2 months later, he changed that to a high of 4.2%. In November of 2011, he changed it to 3.5%. In April of 2012, he talked about a 3.1% GDP growth. September 2012, a 3% growth rate. December of 2012, a 3% growth rate. All the way down, I'm going to skip the rest of them, but all the way down to present September 18th, yesterday, to 2.2%. By the way, he's been wrong every single time. Even the Fed chairman is mesmerized by his quantitative easing and the markets. I hate to sound so, I don't know what it is, self-serving maybe. Hate to say that. I don't believe it is, but it could sound that way. But I've been saying for 4 years, at what point in time will analysts, will the Federal Reserve, all the traders on Wall Street begin to look at the fundamentals of the economy? And folks, if the Fed is right yesterday and we get a 2.3% GDP growth, if he's right, he hasn't been right yet. It's been under what he has estimated. If he's right, we're in big trouble because 2.3% growth is no growth at all. Everybody refuses to believe that, except all of you that have listened to this program for a lot of years. If we cannot keep pace with the growth in our working population, which we have not been able to do, it takes a 2.4 to 2.5% GDP growth to do that. We're going backwards. Do you understand that? We have more people ready to work fewer jobs, no growth, lower wages. We're going backwards. Here's the question. How much longer can we go backwards? How much longer can we go backwards before it all starts crumbling down? There is no end in sight to the slowing down of taper, to quantitative easing. It looks like it's going to be till 2015. I don't know how it can't be when you look at the economic data. And my hope is that since yesterday, the Federal Reserve has lost an enormous amount of credibility. So no one is going to place any certainty in anything that the Fed says. And here we are, trying to be a good steward of what God has given us. And all of those so-called leaders around us have no clue or idea what stewardship or good stewardship means. We have an entire dysfunctional government that has a total inability to foresee, to think about, to ponder, if nothing else, the unintended consequence of everything they're doing, because they only care about one consequence. That one consequence they worry about is losing votes, not getting reelected. Or the other consequence might be, can we kick the can down the road long enough for me to retire from politics? They're worried about the next election, not the next generation. Will this loss of credibility in the Fed, the more uncertainty in the markets and in corporations, will this get anybody thinking about the unintended consequence of what we are doing? Folks, let me just say this to you as well. Let's just say that the numbers are correct and we are lowering our deficit. That means, theoretically, it should mean that we are issuing less debt this month than we did last month, and so on and so forth. We are the Treasury Department, if the numbers are right, the Treasury Department does not have the need, and I gotta believe that there's still a shred of responsibility or a responsible actions in the Fed. They're not going to be printing money or needing to issue debt if they don't really need it. One would hope. And if that is the case, and we are lowering the amount of treasuries that we are printing, yet the Fed is still buying $85 billion a month. I didn't do all the math on this, but I did some math in my head very quickly. And it tells me that we could very easily be in a place by the end of this year or the first part of next year where the Fed is buying 100 to 10% of the debt that the U.S. government has. That means there aren't any outside sources, China, Japan, and others, that we're dependent upon. That the majority of it is coming from the Fed. I'm sorry, but that puts us in a very difficult situation, to say the least. We now have the Federal Reserve not only already being our number one debt holder, but now our number one buyer of debt as others continue to lose interest. There is a consequence to that no one is thinking about. But the bigger consequence is the fact that we have, and I'm being kind here in saying this, the fact is that we are stagnant at best in the economy. And that's what I mean by being kind. No one cares about the median wage of families, inflation, poverty rates, spending rates, consumer spending, food stamps, disabilities, labor participation. No one cares about those things. Folks, they are indicators. They are indicators of the economy. Ben Bernanke said this yesterday. Clip 79, Devin, said this.
In the committee's assessment, the downside risks to growth have diminished on net over the past year, reflecting, among other factors, somewhat better economic and financial conditions in Europe and increased confidence on the part of households and firms in the staying power of the U.S. recovery. However, the tightening of financial conditions observed in recent months, if sustained, could slow the pace of improvement in the economy and the labor market. In addition, federal fiscal policy continues to be an important restraint on growth and a source of downside risk.
Slow growth. Wait a minute. The reason quantitative easing was started 4 years ago was to create growth. Now there's a risk that it's slowing. It's not slowing. It never got moving. There was never any growth to begin with. There's nothing that has slowed down, Mr. Chairman. Your policies have not worked. Slowing down would indicate that something was moving at a good pace and has now slowed down. We haven't had any moving at a good pace. And frankly, if we had, you would have stopped quantitative easing some time ago. The risk to growth has decreased. How is that it's decreased? And if it's decreased, why haven't we seen any growth? And why have you changed your prediction in 3 months from 2.6% growth to 2.3% growth? Clip 80. He says this.
Economic growth has generally been proceeding at a moderate pace, with continued, albeit somewhat uneven, improvement in labor market conditions.
Yeah, I'll say
Of course,
uneven.
to say that the job market has improved does not imply that current conditions are satisfactory. Notably, at 7.3%, the unemployment rate remains well above acceptable levels. Long-term unemployment and underemployment remain high, and we have seen ongoing declines in labor force participation, which likely reflects discouragement on the part of many potential workers, as well as longer-term influences such as the aging of the population. For the unemployment rate, the central tendency of projections for the fourth quarter of each year is 7.1 to 7.3% for 2013, declining to 6.4 to 6.8% in 2014, and by 2016 to 5.4 to 5.9%, about the longer-run normal level for the unemployment rate.
2016, 5.4%. That's still not full employment, folks. And that's assuming that people continue to drop out of the unemployment rate or the labor participation rate. Maybe we'll see that. 866-300-9296. You need some clarification? Give me a call, 866-300-9298. Or your financial questions, 866-300-9298. I've got issues with so much, I can't stop. I'm going to come back. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. We are going to get to the phones, 866-300-9298.
AFR Talk.